Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ashley, pediatric emergency mom. One of the first things I wanted to talk about is food and talking to your kids about food. But before we can even really tackle talking to our kids about food and good foods and the things they should be eating and being healthy and healthy weights and all of those things is that we have to start with ourselves and hold up a mirror to ourselves and figure out like what is our own past relationship and history with food. And I'll tell you why this is so important. Um, I've struggled with my weight my whole life. I've had like not the greatest relationship with food my whole life. And I think that goes for a lot of people. So we take our own experiences and bring them into our parenting style, right? And that's normal, and it's part of being a parent. And until recently, I think things had been going pretty well for us, and my kids were their weights were tracking very normal, healthy weights. And then one of my kids, hit that growth spurt where they get that age where they grow out more than they're going up. And then that was a moment of like, whoa, let's really examine what's going on here, and let's talk about it. But let's not talk about it in a way that will be embarrassing or shameful, or in a way that makes him feel that he's overweight. Let's talk about it more from a health standpoint. And so before we can, like I said, before we can really talk about talking to our kids about food, we have to examine how we feel about food. And so according to the American Psychiatric Association, um, up to like 5% of the population suffers from eating disorders. Now, this is, what you think of: anorexia, bulimia, restrictive diets, pica, which is eating non-food substances, these kind of things. So 5% of the population, like that's a sizable amount, and that's only those that are documented. So it's probably even higher than that. But before we even get to that point, like what happens? What are the steps leading up to that point? And certainly not saying that all kids are going to get to that point. But in thinking about, for example, in my own history, how do my food relationships translate to my parenting style and to my kids? I didn't have a traditional childhood. My dad worked offshore, and so he was gone half the time. It was just my mom and I. I'm an only child, so we did get takeout quite a bit. So for me, that's takeout is a part of my relationship with food. Is like we do takeout, and I think that's part of the whole 70s 80s, growing up during that time, because that's when we drive-throughs were getting big, and lean cuisines and microwave dinners and all of those things, especially for parents who are busy, right, and didn't have time to make meals, or especially like for my mom and I, it doesn't make sense to make a huge meal for two people. And so that's kind of how I grew up. And then labeling, we do this often with our kids, right? That we'll say, well, he's a good eater, she's a picky eater, or I've even heard people say like, oh, he's greedy. And it's one thing for us to say these things if we're talking to another adult and there's no kids in the room. But if our kids are hearing us say these things, then they're internalizing that, well, if she's saying I'm a picky eater, then I'm a picky eater, then I'm not going to even try these other things. Or if I'm greedy, like, oh, that's bad. Am I greedy? When maybe it's a kid that's eating normal size portions. And so thinking about all of those things that we say about our kids or around our kids, I think is really important. And one of my biggest pet peeves, and I'm certainly guilty of it, I'll say that right now, but is using food as a reward. And so I have to think back to when, especially one of my kids was in daycare, and in a certain daycare, and if the teachers had trouble with a kid, they would try to correct, redirect, alleviate the situation in the classroom. But if they couldn't, then they would send the kid to the director of the daycare, who had a drawer full of candy. And it became, if you're good, you get this candy. Um, well, you can see this negative feedback loop of then the kid's going to act out more so that they can get to that place of getting candy, and then, okay, well, I'll be better, I'll get this candy. Same thing even with potty training, right? Using food as a reward. If you go in the potty, you'll get this treat. And in some respects that can be very healthy, if that's what works for your kid, and if the reward is uh, you know, one square of chocolate, or you know, something like that, like something in a very manageable amount. But if it becomes a bag of candy or a fistful of whatever candy, then this becomes a problem. And like, don't even get me started on your potty training, and you're going to reward the toddler with M&Ms, 2 M&Ms, 4 M&Ms, 2 Skittles, 4 Skittles. Like, these are choking foods, and toddlers shouldn't be eating them. I digress. So even thinking back to all of these things and our own personal biases. And so when it comes to what should we be eating and what should our kids be eating, and this is something that I talked to my parents about quite a bit in the emergency department. But I always think back to, there's a Jerry Seinfeld sketch from, like, I don't know, 15 years ago. And he makes a joke about, like, you just see people wandering around in grocery stores, like, looking like, I don't even know what I should be buying or eating. And like, well, that guy looks okay. Like, I wonder what he's eating. I'll buy what he's eating, right? And it does very much feel that way sometimes in the grocery store, especially now with these super center grocery stores. But an easy rule of thumb is to stick to the outside edge of the grocery store. And follow me here. So when you walk in a lot of grocery stores, I'm thinking to the grocery store I went to earlier. If you walk into the right, on that right wall, it's all produce. So there's cold produce, there's the produce in the middle that's next to it, right? Like the apples, the bananas. So there's produce, there's the fruits, vegetables. And then as you kind of round that back corner, and again, I'm thinking to this one grocery store, then you get into your proteins, your cold proteins. So your fish, your ground beef, your chicken. And then keep going, and you get into dairy. And so all of that is cold. Milk, yogurt, butter, those kind of things. And then as you round even farther, you get to eggs, and etc. And so if you stick to those things, and then, sorry, on a wall somewhere in between there, usually on a wall or on an aisle that's pretty close to the outside, you get your grains, right? Your breads, bagels, tortillas, that kind of thing. Is usually not toward the middle. Sometimes it is, but it's closer to the outside. And so that kind of covers where you should focus your shopping. Now, when it comes to parents on a budget, or parents who, whether that be a monetary budget or a time budget, the other thing I'll suggest is the frozen aisle for frozen chopped vegetables. So not in a cheese sauce, not in anything like that, for frozen chopped vegetables, or frozen fruit, again, not in a sugar kind of sauce or anything, just regular frozen vegetables. And so then that becomes way easier. It's easier, it's already chopped. For the vegetables, for both of those things, if it's frozen, it's going to have a longer shelf life. But all of that processed stuff in the middle is garbage, and really trying to stay away from all of that stuff. The Nutri-Grain bars, garbage. And I'm sorry that I'm picking on certain things. I guess I should say breakfast bars or whatever. Does it matter that there are whole grains in there? No. It's processed and it's full of refined sugar. Chips, please stay away. You know, I mean, any of those things that can just sit on the shelf for months and months and months, we probably shouldn't be consuming. And if you really want to take a deeper dive into that, just look at foods, and especially processed foods that are allowed and USDA approved in the United States, or FDA approved in the United States, but banned in Europe or not allowed in Europe. And that will give you some idea of kind of what we should and should not be eating. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. So that's just a start to this conversation of talking to our kids about food. You know, in the next video, I'm just going to talk about how I talk to my kids about food. Like, why do we eat in the first place? Okay, you're hungry, but why are you hungry? And going through, you know, why food is used to fuel the body and how we have to have a certain balance of certain types of food to make our body, because our body's a machine, run at an optimal level. And I think a lot of the time in talking about food in that way, kids understand things, right? They're smart. We should be talking to them like the smart little beings that they are, and addressing it like that. So, food, like, y'all, so many notes, and food is, we can and will talk about for hours. But that's just an intro guide to really think about your own history with food, before you try to pivot and readjust the way you do things with kids and talking about food with your kids. Hope this was helpful. Also wanted to share with you guys, this is my favorite purse. This is my chicken purse. It's very handsome. Hope y'all have a great day.